Guys, I am sorry I'm just getting this uploaded for you, but I wanted to talk a little bit about revision and the writing process. Since you guys are finishing up a draft of your first paper and you're sharing it in peer review, I wanted to kind of go over a few things about revision as a process and also about the peer review process, because I know that this is something that a lot of students kind of don't enjoy and find problematic. So it's kind of impossible to talk about the writing process or to talk about revision without talking about the writing process in general. And this may be something that you guys are familiar with from high school classes or other sources, and some of you, this may be the very first time that you're hearing about it. But the writing process is kind of how we talk about the different stages of writing. And this is an oversimplification, but we kind of break them into 4 stages. So there's pre-writing, drafting, revision, and then finally editing and proofreading. So before we kind of talk about revision specifically and peer revision, I want to talk a little bit about all 4 of these. So in the beginning, before you kind of go back and start changing things, you have pre-writing and drafting. So this is how you kind of get to the point where you have something to revise. So pre-writing is basically anything that you do before you officially begin writing or drafting your paper. This can also be for a speech or a presentation. This can include all kinds of techniques. So things like free writing, where you just sit down and write until you run out of things to say. Listing, so just kind of writing out a list of ideas. Mapping or webbing, these are taking those ideas that you've listed and connecting them with lines so that you can see how things are connected and how things might work within your paper. Outlining, so a lot of you are familiar with outlines. You might have done this in a speech class, or you might have done this in one of your previous writing classes, but this is taking like your main ideas and setting them up in kind of the organization that you'll put them in for your paper. So I'm a big proponent of pre-writing. I think it's really difficult to just sit down and start writing a paper. I think if you do that, you're kind of setting yourself up for stress and failure. And so I really believe that it's important to do some pre-writing things. I'm a big fan of listing things. I'm a big fan of outlining. I cannot sit down without kind of a plan, and that outline is my plan. And one of my favorite pre-writing strategies is just kind of talking through my topic with someone else. So I have several friends when I'm working on a writing project that I touch base with, and I'm just like, hey, let me just kind of pick your brain for a second and talk through this idea. And I make them listen and tell me if I'm making sense and if my ideas are kind of on track. So once you've kind of thought through your ideas and flesh those out a little bit, then that's when you start drafting and you sit down, and I say put pen to paper, because some people like to start drafting with a piece of paper in front of them. Or you put cursor to screen. It's really up to you what works best for you, and you actually write out your paper. That's when you get that the meat of your essay down for your assignment. So once you've done that, ideally you'll be able to step away from it, take a little break from it. I know that's not always realistic for some of us. I have always kind of been a student who procrastinated, so I didn't always have that luxury, and I'm sure some of you sympathize, but that is ideal, is to have a little break from it. But then you would get to revision, and kind of like the name suggests, revision is quite literally, it's reviewing your paper. So looking at your paper anew. So when you revise your paper, ideally you're looking at your paper to determine what you can do to make your paper more effective. So a lot of people, when they think about revision, A lot of people use the terms revision and editing or revision and proofreading interchangeably, and they're really two different things. When you're revising, you're not looking at things like grammar and punctuation. You're going to be looking at what I consider to be the bigger things. These are things that are going to they're going to include like your line of argument or your thesis. Do I have a clear, solid thesis or argument here, kind of as the backbone of my paper? Thinking like your audience. So looking at your ideas, looking at your tone, and thinking about how your target audience might kind of take what you're saying, and considering whether you need to make adjustments based on your audience. And things like your organization. How well does my paper flow? So maybe you've gotten all your ideas down on paper, but you're not really sure about the order. Maybe you realize, ooh, that's a really great point. I feel like I should kind of save that for last and work up to it. So looking at kind of the order of your points in your organization, your topic sentences, your transitions, those kinds of things are part of your organization. Those are all of the things that kind of go into revision. And then editing and proofreading, those aren't the same thing, but we're not going to kind of get into the nitty gritty of that right now. That's going to be when you say, you know what, I have a deadline approaching, I have to step away from this piece of writing and stop working on those bigger things, and I need to look at things like word choice, sentence structure, punctuation, formatting, what I consider the smaller things, or as my students always say, grammar. That's going to fall under editing and proofreading. Now, when you kind of lay these things out in these 4 steps, that seems very neat. And the truth is that writing doesn't really fall into these 4 neat steps, one after the other. These things kind of run into each other. So when I start, thinking through an idea and doing my pre-writing, and then I start drafting, a lot of times I will kind of start revising my paper and realize, ooh, I don't really have enough here. I need to go back kind of to the drawing board. So I'll kind of return to the first step, which is pre-writing, and I'll be like, I really need to brainstorm some more ideas to kind of back up this point. So it's kind of cyclical. It's not necessarily start at point A and end at point D. It's often kind of moving back and forth between these. But this is one way for us to look at it. Okay, so thinking about revision specifically, a lot of writing teachers kind of bemoan the fact that students really don't revise. And there's been a lot of kind of arguments about why that is, and I think a lot of it is because you're not taught to revise. I think it's really your writing teacher's fault. We haven't taught you how to ask questions about your writing. So hopefully as we progress over the course of the semester, I will help you guys to ask those questions about your own writing and about your peers' writing. Nancy Summers, in her article, Revision Strategies of Student Writers and Experienced Adult Writers, at the university where she works, she looked at a large group of student writers and had them go through a series of drafts, and kind of think about the way that they look at their writing. And then she worked with a group of what she considered experienced writers. These were academics, journalists, people who write on a daily basis. And she asked them to do the same thing and to kind of record what sorts of things they were doing during revision. And then she kind of compared the two. And these are the things that she noticed. She noticed that student writers were by far paying way too much attention to word choice. Most of the students that she talked to, when she said, what are you doing during a revision, they were talking about changing words, scratching out words, finding better words. So very much like kind of on a micro level rather than kind of looking at the big picture. Which kind of leads into the second point. This lack of attention to the text as a whole or to finding the meaning in the text. So students weren't necessarily concerned with the quality of their argument or looking at how it developed over the course of the entire paper, or kind of figuring out if the meaning that they were trying to get across was coming across to the reader. And then also the idea that she said that students really seemed to feel like they needed to stick to a predetermined meaning. And this really sticks out to me because I think that one of the wonderful things about writing is it gives you the chance to learn about a topic and about your own kind of ideas about a topic as you go. So it may be that you start out kind of believing that you're writing A, but then as you write, you realize, oh, what I'm really trying to say is B. And that's one of the things that the experienced writers allowed themselves to do. They allowed their writing to change. So the experienced writers, they use revision to discover their argument, kind of, rather than sticking to a predetermined meaning, they allowed their argument to evolve, and they allowed it to help them to discover and create meaning. And they also spent a lot of time thinking about their audience. How is my audience going to react to this specific example? How is my audience going to react to my tone? How is my audience going to react to me opening with a personal anecdote rather than maybe a set of statistics? Those are the kinds of things that she said the experienced writers considered. And those are really the things that we want to be thinking about during revision. The things that the student writers were thinking about, those are the things that we really want to think about when we talk about kind of getting near the end. When we're done with the big things, we're going to be thinking more about the micro stuff. So why peer revision? So for those of you who are returning to school after a break, you might never have done peer revision. For those of you who have been in high school recently, or maybe you've taken a college class before, a college writing class before, maybe you're familiar with peer revision. When I bring up peer revision for my students, I get a lot of pushback. Students typically don't like the process of peer revision. I'll get to kind of some of the arguments for that in a second. But let me explain to you why I do peer revision. So I think that for you, peer revision can be really helpful because you're practicing your reading skills. So you're reading with a purpose. Your purpose is to help your peer. And when we read with a purpose, that's a much more kind of helpful process than when we're not aware. We're always reading with a purpose, but we're here, I think, hyper aware of our purpose. We're reading to help someone else with their writing. So you're practicing your reading skills in order to discern a writer's main point, locate key points of support or relevant data, figure out what is clear and what is not. Peer revision also helps you with your writing skills. You're going to be communicating with your peer in writing, so you're going to have to practice writing clearly and writing very specific comments and questions for your peer. Again, with a very specific purpose and audience. And also, it helps you with collaboration skills. So, this is something that you're going to have to do for the rest of your life, is work with other people. And so you're phrasing critiques in like a very descriptive, constructive way. Hopefully, we want to avoid the good job. Give your peers something to work with. Peer revision, I think, is also really helpful because, if nothing else, it helps you to see how other people are approaching the assignment. It shows you that there is not just one way to do this. I get so many emails from students who are like, is this the right way? And I'm like, this is great. There is no right way. There are lots of right ways, and this is one of them. So this helps you to kind of see how others are approaching the assignment. Peer revision also helps your peers because, and I'm going to get into this in a second, at this kind of question of what do I have to offer, but you know, although we have a lot of wonderful tutors in the Writing Center where I'm currently sitting who can work with you on your writing, who is more familiar with this assignment than you, a fellow classmate? You have been through every step of this. You have seen all of the stuff that kind of conveys my expectations. You've maybe had conversations with me. You are in an excellent position to kind of help your peer with this. One of, I think, the biggest kind of objections to doing peer review is this whole idea of, but I'm not qualified to give my peers feedback on their papers. I'm not a writing teacher. I'm not a writing tutor. And I get that, but that's not what I'm asking you to do. You are not going into this to be an evaluator. You're not here to tell the writer what they're going to make on the paper. You are reading this and you're responding to the paper as a reader. And that is absolutely a role that you could fulfill. So you're going to be telling your peer how effective you found the text at achieving its purpose. So in this case, did your peer convey, for the rhetorical analysis, did your peer convey their point about what the purpose of the text was and whether or not the author achieved it? Did they back that up with good examples? You're also in a great position to say, hey, I understood this, but I didn't understand this. You can tell your peer what you want to know more about. This is really interesting. Can you give us more here? You can tell them what thoughts or questions arise. Those are all great things for you to kind of respond to as a reader, and that's why your feedback really is valuable here. Hopefully, peer review this semester will be something that you don't find painful. Hopefully, it'll be something that you find valuable. And as always, I'm here to answer questions and give you guys any kind of help that I can. I'm really looking forward to reading your papers, guys.